Billionaire stood in the hospital, cold and distant, until his wife asked him to hold one of their newborn twins. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble kitchen island where Elias Thornhill stood, adjusting his platinum cuff. At 39, he commanded every room he entered. 6 feet of calculated confidence wrapped in a tailored Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Coffee is getting cold, Alyssa called from the breakfast nook, her voice carrying that gentle teasing tone that had become their morning ritual. She sat cross-legged in an oversized cream sweater, auburn hair falling in loose waves over her shoulder, completely unaware of how the sunlight made her look like something from a dream. Elias glanced at his peck. Philippe, 7:23 a.m. He had exactly 7 minutes before his driver would arrive, 17 minutes before his first meeting, and approximately 4 hours before he could think about anything other than the Henderson acquisition that would add another $200 million to his portfolio. But when he looked at her, time seemed negotiable. 7 more minutes, he said, walking over to where she sat with her steaming mug and yesterday's crossword puzzle. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her vanilla shampoo. She murmured, leaning back against him. Remember when you used to say that about everything? 7 more minutes in bed, 7 more minutes at dinner, 7 more minutes before we had to leave for your charity thing. I still say that. No, you don't. She twisted in her chair to look up at him, those green eyes holding a mixture of affection and something he couldn't quite name. Now you say things like, I'll be home by 9 o'clock, and can we reschedule, and this merger won't close itself. Elias felt something twist in his chest. Not unpleasant, just present, like a reminder that he'd forgotten something important. That's not fair, isn't it? Alyssa stood, wrapping her arms around his neck. At 5'6" she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. When's the last time you canceled a meeting for me? The question hung in the air between them, and Elias realized he didn't have an answer. Not because he couldn't remember, but because he wasn't sure it had ever happened. Not in the past year. Anyway, his phone buzzed. Henderson's attorney, probably wanting to move up there 2 p.m. to 1:30. Don't, Alyssa said softly, her fingers finding the phone in his jacket pocket before he could reach for it. Don't look at it. Not for 7 more minutes. Something in her voice made him pause. She wasn't asking for the world, just 7 minutes. When had 7 minutes become something she had to negotiate for? Okay, he said, surprising himself. 7 more minutes, she smiled. Then, the kind of smile that had made him rearrange his entire schedule 3 years ago, just to take her to a whole-enthralled diner in Queens, because she'd mentioned loving their blueberry pancakes. When had he stopped doing things like that? I love you, she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. I love this. Us, our quiet mornings. I love you, too, he replied automatically, but as the words left his mouth, he realized how long it had been since he'd said them first without prompting, without response to her saying them first. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Thornhill, your car is here. Elias felt Alyssa's arms loosen around his neck, watched her step back with that practiced smile she developed, the one that said she understood his priorities even when she wished they were different. Go, she said, straightening his tie. Make another million. He kissed her forehead, grabbed his briefcase, and headed toward the door. But something made him pause in the hallway, some instinct that told him to turn around, to look at her one more time. She was standing by the window now, her hand pressed against the glass, watching the city wake up below them, and for just a moment, she looked impossibly small in their massive apartment, like she was disappearing into all that space and luxury. Liz, she turned, eyebrows raised. Tonight, dinner, just us, no phones. Her smile was worth every meeting he'd have to reschedule. But as he stepped into the elevator, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was already failing at something he hadn't even realized was a test. Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's version of happiness while your own slipped through your fingers? 3 weeks later, Alyssa sat on the cold marble floor of their master bathroom, staring at the small plastic stick in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines, clear as daylight, clear as the nausea that had been waking her up every morning for the past week, clear as the exhaustion that hit her like a truck every afternoon around 3, pregnant. She pressed her back against the Italian marble wall, letting the cool stones steady her racing heart. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not yet. They'd talked about children, of course, in those dreamy late-night conversations that couples have when everything feels possible. Someday, Elias would say, tracing patterns on her shoulder when things settled down at work. But Elias's work never settled down. There was always another acquisition, another merger, another deal that would change everything if he could just focus on it completely. The sound of the front door closing echoed through their apartment. He was home early, barely past 7. Maybe it was a sign. "Liz, you here?" In the bedroom, she called back quickly, shoving the pregnancy test into the small drawer beside the sink. She needed a moment to process this, to figure out how to tell him in a way that wouldn't send him into that controlled panic mode he got when unexpected things disrupted his carefully planned world. She found him in their walk-in closet, already loosening his tie, his jacket thrown over the leather armchair that cost more than most people's cars. "How was the Henderson meeting?" she asked, settling cross-legged on their bed, watching him through the open closet door. "Brutal. His lawyers are asking for provisions that would basically give them veto power over any future developments on the property." Elias emerged from the closet in dark jeans and a soft gray Henley, his home uniform, she called it, "but we'll work it out. Always do." He sat on the edge of the bed and she crawled over to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders from behind. He leaned into her touch, and for a moment they just sat there in comfortable silence. "I made reservations at Morello's," he said, "that little place in Brooklyn you love. Thought we could walk along the promenade." After Alyssa's heart squeezed. This was the Elias she'd fallen in love with, the one who remembered tiny details, who planned surprises just to see her smile. Maybe this was exactly the right time to tell him. "That sounds perfect," she said, pressing her face into his neck. "Elias I love our life. You know that, right?" He turned in her arms, studying her face with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing in boardrooms, and apparently missed very little at home either. "What's going on?" "Nothing's going on. She took a breath. "I love that we have these moments, these quiet evenings, and I know you work so hard to give us this life, and I appreciate it." "I appreciate you." His expression softened. "You're being weird. I'm being grateful." "Since when do you need to tell me you're grateful? You show me every day." He cubed her face in his hands. "Talk to me. What's really going on?" The words were right there, sitting on her tongue, like a secret that wanted to be shared. But something in his eyes, a flicker of concern that looked almost like fear, made her hesitate. "I'm just happy," she said finally. "Is that allowed?" He kissed her forehead, and she could feel some tension leave his shoulders. "It's required." Later, over candlelit dinner, at the tiny Italian restaurant where they'd had their first official date, Alyssa watched Elias laugh at something their server had said about the wine selection. He looked younger when he laughed, less like the man who commanded boardrooms and more like the man who used to wake her up with terrible impressions of their neighbors. "Remember our first date here?" she asked, swirling her sparkling water. She'd ordered it instead of wine, and Elias hadn't questioned it. "You ordered 3 appetizers because you couldn't decide, and you ate 2 of them because you were trying to impress me. Did it work? The fact that you suffered through those awful stuffed mushrooms?" "Absolutely." She reached across the table to take his hand. "You were so nervous." "I was not nervous. You reorganized the salt and pepper shakers 4 times. Elias looked down at the table where the salt and pepper shakers were indeed lined up with military precision. "I like things organized. You like things controlled," she corrected gently. "There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression. Subtle, but she caught it. That flicker of discomfort that appeared whenever she pointed out his need to manage every variable in his environment. "Control isn't always a bad thing," he said carefully. "No," she agreed. "But sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan for." They walked home along the Brooklyn Heights promenade, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the water like scattered diamonds. Elias had his arm around her shoulders, and she could feel his body heat through his jacket as the October wind whipped off the East River. "I missed this," he said quietly. "What?" "Just us. No distractions." Alyssa felt the pregnancy test burning like a secret in her purse. Soon, she told herself. Soon she would tell him, and everything would change. But for now, for these last few moments, she wanted to hold on to this version of them, this quiet, perfect version where the biggest decision they had to make was whether to stop for ice cream on the way home. "Me, too," she whispered, and meant it. But as they walked, she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said earlier. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan for. She just hoped he meant it. The pregnancy test sat on the kitchen counter like a small bomb waiting to detonate. Alyssa had placed it there 20 minutes ago, right next to Elias's coffee mug, the navy blue one that read, "World's okayest husband," that she'd bought him as a joke last Christmas. She could hear him in the shower humming something off-key, probably already mentally reviewing his schedule for the day. Thursday mornings were always brutal for him, back-to-back meetings that stretched from 8 a.m. until well past dinner. But today was different. Today, everything was going to change. Alyssa paced between the kitchen island and the living room windows, her bare feet silent on the heated hardwood floors. Outside Manhattan was waking up in its usual chaotic symphony. Car horns, construction noise, the distant rumble of the subway. Normal sounds for a morning that felt anything but normal. The shower stopped running. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she listened to his familiar routine. Electric toothbrush for exactly 2 minutes. Cologne, just 2 sprays, never more. And then the sound of hangers sliding across the rod in their walk-in closet. "Liz, did you move my blue tie? The one with the small pattern?" "Check the dry cleaning bag," she called back, her voice surprisingly steady. "I picked it up yesterday. Found it. Thanks." 10 more minutes, maybe 15. And he'd be grabbing his coffee and heading out the door to conquer another day in his carefully constructed empire. Except today, she was going to tell him that his empire was about to include a nursery. When Elias walked into the kitchen, he was already reaching for his coffee mug before he saw it. The small plastic stick that would change everything. His hand froze halfway to the handle. "What is that?" he asked, though they both knew exactly what it was. "It's a pregnancy test," Alyssa said quietly, watching his face, searching for any sign of the joy she'd been hoping for, praying for. Elias picked up the test, stared at the 2 pink lines for a long moment, then set it back down like it might burn him. When his voice was completely flat, the same tone he used when a deal was falling apart. "When did I take the test, or when did it happen?" "Both. I took the test this morning." "As for when it happened," she shrugged, trying for lightness. "Probably that weekend at the Hamptons' house. Remember? It was raining and we stayed in bed until noon, and you said, 'How could this happen?'" The question cut through her words like a blade. Alyssa blinked. "How could it happen?" "Elias, we're married. We make love. This is what happens sometimes. We're careful." "Not always. We're always careful." He was pacing now, running his hands through his dark hair in a gesture she recognized, the same one he made when a competitor outbid him on a property he wanted. "Birth control isn't 100% effective," she said, her voice growing smaller. "I mean, we've talked about this. We've talked about having kids someday. We talked about someday." The word hit her like a slap. Someday, like children were a distant possibility, a maybe never that he'd agreed to consider in some far-off future when his life was perfectly arranged. "And what's wrong with now?" she asked. Elias stopped pacing and looked at her. Really, looked at her. And for a moment, she saw something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or panic. "Everything," he said quietly, "everything is wrong with now." The words hung between them like a physical barrier. Alyssa felt something cold settle in her chest, spreading outward until her fingers felt numb. "I don't understand. The Henderson deal is worth $300 million. I've been working on it for 8 months. The Riverside development is breaking ground in January. I'm launching the Sustainable Housing Initiative next quarter." He was counting off on his fingers like items on a business agenda. I don't have time for this right now. Time for this." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Time for our baby." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Elias looked at his watch, an unconscious gesture that felt like a knife turning in her chest. Even now, even during this moment that would define their entire future, he was thinking about time, about schedules, about getting to his next appointment. "I meant that the timing is terrible. We haven't even discussed logistics. Where would we put in nursery? How would we handle childcare? What about your freelance work? What about travel for business?" "We'd figure it out," Alyssa said, hating how desperate she sounded. "People figure it out every day. Other people don't have my responsibilities." The coldness in her chest spread to her throat. "Other people don't have your responsibilities." "Elias, listen to yourself. You're talking about our baby like it's a scheduling conflict." "I'm not." He stopped, took a breath, and she could see him pulling on that mask of control he wore in boardrooms. "Look, this is just a lot to process. Can we table this conversation until tonight? I really need to get to the office." "Table the conversation?" She couldn't keep the incredulity out of her voice. "I just told you, I'm pregnant, and you want to table the conversation. I have the Henderson meeting at 9 o'clock. Cancel it. The words hung in the air between them, and Alyssa realized she'd never asked him to cancel anything before. Not a meeting, not a dinner, not a phone call. She'd always been the understanding wife, the one who adapted her schedule to his, who never made demands. I can cancel the Henderson meeting. Yes, you can. Alyssa, be realistic. I am being realistic. I'm pregnant with your child and I need to talk to my husband about what that means for our life together. That's realistic. What's not realistic is expecting me to wait until it's convenient for your schedule. Elias's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it automatically. Don't, she said. He looked at the phone again. Don't you dare answer that phone. But he was already reaching for it. It's just, if you answer that phone right now, I will never forgive you. Their eyes met, and for a moment, she thought she saw the man she'd married, the one who used to say that nothing was more important than the two of them. The phone stopped buzzing. Then it started again. Elias picked it up. Henderson. Yeah, I'm on my way. No, move it to the conference room on the 32nd floor. The lighting is better for the presentation. Alyssa watched him talk, watched him slip back into his other life, the one where she and this baby were just complications to be managed. When he hung up, she was already walking toward their bedroom. Liz, where are you going? To pack a bag. What? She turned around in the doorway, and when she looked at him, she felt like she was seeing a stranger. Because I just told you, I'm carrying your child and you chose a business meeting over me again. It's not that simple. Yes, Elias, she said, her voice breaking. It really is. The sound of the bedroom door closing behind her felt like the end of something precious. Something she wasn't sure they'd ever be able to get back. Alyssa had been staying at her sister Nora's apartment in Queens for 3 days, sleeping on a pull-out couch that smelled faintly of her 2-year-old nephew's goldfish crackers. The contrast couldn't have been starker. From marble countertops and heated floors to linoleum and a radiator that clanged like an angry ghost every hour on the hour. But it was honest here, real. When Nora's son Camden woke up crying at 2 a.m., someone actually got up to comfort him. When he spilled juice on the coffee table, nobody called a service to clean it. They just grabbed paper towels and moved on with their lives. You can't stay on my couch forever, Nora said, settling beside her with 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. At 28, Nora had the nonsense practicality that came from raising a toddler on a teacher's salary, while her husband worked double shifts at the fire station. I know. Have you talked to him? Alyssa held up her phone. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, all variations of, we need to discuss this like adults, and please come home so we can work this out. What's the longest message? 3 paragraphs about how he's been thinking, and he realizes he could have handled things better. But he still thinks they need to approach this situation strategically. Alyssa set her phone face down on the rickety coffee table. He's treating our baby like a merger. Nora was quiet for a moment, watching Camden build an elaborate tower out of wooden blocks in the corner. You know what Mom used to say when we were kids, and you'd get overwhelmed, that feelings aren't facts, right? But she also said that facts without feelings are just statistics. Nora nudged her sister's shoulder. Maybe Elias is scared. Scared people don't schedule phone calls to discuss their fear. Rich, scared people do. Despite everything, Alyssa almost smiled. He left me a voicemail yesterday asking if I'd be available for a productive conversation at 2:30 p.m. between his lunch with investors and his call with the London office. Jesus, I know, right? Who schedules a marriage counseling session like it's a quarterly review? Camden's tower crashed down, and he immediately started rebuilding it. Same blocks, same order, completely unbothered by the collapse. There was something almost philosophical about his persistence. The thing is, Alyssa continued, I keep thinking about the man I married. Remember, at our wedding during the vows, he went completely off script. Nora smiled. I remember you both had these beautiful, carefully written promises. And then, he just started talking. He said he'd never been good at surprises, but that loving me had taught him that the best things in life were the ones that disrupted his plans. Alyssa's voice caught. He said that every day with me felt like a beautiful interruption. And now I'm pregnant. And it's not a beautiful interruption. It's just an interruption. Nora reached over and squeezed her hand. Maybe he needs time to remember who he is when he's not being a CEO. That afternoon, Alyssa found herself walking through Central Park, trying to clear her head. The October air was crisp, leaves crunching under her sneakers, a far cry from the designer heels that had become her uniform over the past 3 years. She'd forgotten how it felt to walk without purpose, to move through the world without a destination or agenda. She was sitting on a bench near Bethesda Fountain when her phone rang. Not Elias this time, her doctor's office, confirming her appointment for next week. "Yes, I'll be there," she said, and then hesitated. "Actually, can I ask you something? Do you usually recommend that both parents come to the first prenatal appointment?" "It's not required, but it's certainly encouraged. Many couples find it helps them both feel connected to the pregnancy from the beginning." After she hung up, Alyssa stared at the fountain for a long time. She could picture it so clearly. Elias, in the waiting room, checking his phone while she filled out paperwork. Him asking the doctor about timeline and logistics while she tried to listen for their baby's heartbeat. Two people in the same room, experiencing completely different realities. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elias. "Liz, please, can we just talk? I cleared my schedule this evening." She stared at the message for several minutes. He'd cleared his schedule. That should have meant something, but somehow it felt like another business transaction. Time allocated for the Alyssa problem, blocked out in his calendar between more important meetings. But then she thought about Camden rebuilding his tower. Patient and determined. Maybe some things were worth rebuilding, even if they kept falling down. She typed back, "Tomorrow, 7:00 p.m., the coffee shop on 82nd, where we had our second date. And Elias, don't bring your phone." His response came within 30 seconds. "I'll be there." That evening, back on Nora's couch, Alyssa lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of a normal life happening around her. Camden's baby monitor crackling with the sound of his sleep breathing. Nora and her husband David murmuring quietly in their bedroom. The neighbor's dog barking at something only it could see. She pressed her hand to her still flat stomach and whispered, "I don't know what kind of father he's going to be, little one, but I promise you this. You won't have to earn his love. You won't have to fit into his schedule to matter." Through the thin walls, she could hear David getting up to check on Camden, his footsteps soft in the hallway. No drama, no negotiation, just a father taking care of his child because that's what fathers do. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine Elias doing the same thing. The image wouldn't quite come into focus, but tomorrow she would give him the chance to prove her wrong. Tomorrow, she would sit across from him in a coffee shop that charged $3 for a latte instead of 15, and she would listen to what he had to say. She just hoped he would finally have something worth hearing. The bean counter hadn't changed in 3 years. Same mismatched chairs, same chipped ceramic mugs, same handwritten menu board with coffee prices that belonged to a different decade. Alyssa arrived 10 minutes early and chose the same corner table where they'd sat on their second date when Elias had been charming and nervous and completely unlike the controlled businessman the rest of the world knew. She ordered a decaf coffee, her first concession to pregnancy, and tried not to check the door every 30 seconds. Outside, Queens moved at its own unhurried pace. A woman pushed a stroller while talking animatedly on her phone. An elderly man fed pigeons from a paper bag. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the weight of expectations in empire building. At exactly 7 p.m., Elias walked through the door. He looked different somehow, younger. Maybe in dark jeans and a simple gray sweater instead of his usual armor of expensive suits. His hair was slightly mused, like he'd been running his hands through it, and when he spotted her in the corner, his relief was so obvious it almost made her forgive him. "Almost. You came," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "I said I would." "I know," but he gestured vaguely. "I wasn't sure." The barista, a college kid with purple hair and paint-stained fingers, wandered over with the casual indifference that came from working at a place where nobody wore 1,000 watches. "What can I get you?" Elias glanced around, taking in the handwritten menu. The mason jar tip holder, the complete absence of anything resembling his usual world, just coffee, regular coffee, black. After the barista left, they sat in silence for a moment. Through the window, Alyssa could see the subway entrance where commuters emerged and disappeared like ants in a colony. Everyone focused on their own small piece of the vast puzzle of the city. "I've been thinking," Elias said finally, "for 3 days. For 3 days." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the scarred wooden table. "And I realize I handled everything wrong. The way I reacted when you told me the phone call, all of it. I was shocked. And I don't handle surprises well. Our baby isn't a surprise, Elias. It's a consequence of 2 people who love each other and are married to each other. I know that, do you? Because when I told you I was pregnant, you looked at me like I just announced I'd lost all our money in Vegas." The barista returned with Elias's coffee in a mug that had clearly seen better decades. He wrapped his hands around it like it was an anchor. "I was scared," he admitted quietly. "Of what?" of everything, of being a father, of not being good at it, of he stopped, stared into his coffee, of turning into my father. Alyssa felt something shift in her chest. In all their years together, Elias had mentioned his father maybe half a dozen times, and never with anything resembling emotion. Your father left when you were 12. He didn't just leave. He ran, the minute things got complicated. The minute my mom got sick and needed real support instead of just financial contributions, he disappeared. Elias's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I swore I'd never be that man. So instead, you became a different kind of absent father, one who's physically present but emotionally unavailable. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Elias flinched like she'd slapped him. That's not what I'm trying to be. Then what are you trying to be? Someone who can provide, someone who can give our child everything they need. What about what I need? What do you mean? Alyssa sat down her mug harder than she meant to, coffee sloshing over the rim. I need a partner, Elias, not a provider, not a man who treats our pregnancy like a project to be managed. I need the man who used to wake me up with terrible jokes and take me to diners at midnight because I mentioned craving pancakes. I'm still that man. Are you? Because that man would have been excited about our baby. That man would have canceled every meeting in his calendar to talk about names and nursery colors, and how we're going to figure this out together. I can't just cancel everything. Why not? Because people are depending on me. The Henderson deal alone will create jobs for 300 people. The Riverside development will provide affordable housing for Stop. Alyssa held up her hand. Just stop. Do you hear yourself? You're hiding behind your work again. I'm not hiding. I'm being responsible. Responsible to everyone except the woman carrying your child. The coffee shop had filled up around them, students with laptops, a couple sharing a piece of cake, an old man reading a newspaper like it was still 1995. All these people living their lives, making it work without billion-dollar empires or strategic 5-year plans. I don't know how to do this, Elias said suddenly, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear him. Do what? Be spontaneous. Be messy. My whole life has been about control, about planning every variable, about never being caught off guard. He looked up at her and she saw something raw in his eyes. But babies don't follow business plans, do they? No, they don't. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I can't love them the way they deserve to be loved? For the first time since she'd told him about the pregnancy, Alyssa saw a crack in his carefully constructed facade. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just a man who was terrified of failing at the most important job he'd ever have. You won't be terrible at it, she said softly. How can you be sure? Because you're terrified. Bad fathers don't worry about being bad fathers. Elias was quiet for a long moment, turning his mug in small circles on the table. I want to try, he said finally. I want to be the man you fell in love with. I want to be excited about this baby. But I need you to be patient with me. I need you to come home so we can figure this out together. Alyssa studied his face, searching for the truth beneath the words. If I come home, things have to change. Really change. Not just promises, not just good intentions. What do you need from me? I need you to show up, not just physically, but emotionally. I need you to choose us every day, even when it's inconvenient. I can do that. Everything made her nauseous these days. The smell of coffee, the sound of construction outside, the sight of happy couples walking hand in hand down the street. I'll eat it in a minute. You said that yesterday, and the day before. Nora sat down beside her, wearing the patient but firm expression she used on her kindergarten students. Liz, you can't starve yourself because you're angry at Elias. I'm not starving myself. You've lost weight while you're pregnant. That's not normal. Alyssa knew her sister was right. Her clothes hung loose everywhere except her belly, and her face had taken on the hollow look of someone who wasn't sleeping or eating enough. But food required energy she didn't have, and sleep meant lying awake in the dark, thinking about all the ways her life had fallen apart. Her phone sat silent on the table beside the untouched breakfast. Elias had stopped calling after the first week, stopped texting after the second. The silence should have been a relief, but instead it felt like confirmation of everything she'd feared, that when things got difficult, when she wasn't convenient anymore, he simply moved on. He came by again, Nora said quietly. Alyssa's head snapped up. When yesterday morning after you left for your appointment, he wanted to know how you were doing, if you needed anything. What did you tell him? That you were seeing the doctor alone while he was probably in some boardroom making his next million. Nora's voice carried an edge of protective anger that reminded Alyssa why she'd always been grateful for her. Little sister's fierce loyalty. He didn't look good. Liz, tired, like he hasn't been sleeping either. Good is it though? Is it good that you're both miserable? Alyssa pulled her knees up to her chest, or as close as her growing belly would allow, and wrapped her arms around them. Outside, November rain droomed against the windows of Nora's tiny apartment, matching the gray mood that had settled over her life like a fog that wouldn't lift. He made his choice, she said when he celebrated the biggest moment of his career, with everyone except his pregnant wife. He made his choice. Maybe, or maybe he made a mistake. Some mistakes are too big to forgive. Nora was quiet for a moment, watching her nephew Camden play with his toy trucks in the corner. The little boy was completely absorbed in his imaginary world, making engine noises and creating elaborate scenarios where the red truck always saved the day. "Remember when Dad left?" Nora asked suddenly. Alyssa felt her chest tighten. Their father had walked out when she was 15, and Nora was 12. Not because of another woman or financial problems, but simply because he decided that being a husband and father was harder than he'd expected. "That's different, is it? Dad didn't leave because he stopped loving us. He left because he was scared of failing us. So, he failed us first on his own terms." Nora turned to face her sister. "What if Elias is doing the same thing? Then he's a coward. Maybe. But maybe he's just a man who doesn't know how to be vulnerable without losing control of everything else in his life." Before Alyssa could respond, her phone rang. Dr. Martinez's office, probably confirming her appointment for next week, or calling with results from her latest blood work. "Hello, Mrs. Thornhill. This is Janet from Dr. Martinez's office. I'm calling about your ultrasound results from yesterday." Alyssa's heart stopped. She'd had the routine 16-week scan, the one that was supposed to be exciting, where other women brought their husbands to see their baby's profile for the first time. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, everything's fine. Actually, Dr. Martinez wanted me to call because she noticed something on the ultrasound that she thought you'd want to know about." "What kind of something?" "Well, it looks like you're having twins." The phone slipped from Alyssa's suddenly numb fingers, clattering onto the coffee table. Nora looked up sharply and Camden stopped playing with his trucks. "Liz, what's wrong?" Alyssa stared at the phone, Janet's voice still coming through the speaker, explaining something about scheduled appointments and monitoring multiples and how exciting this must be. Twins, 2 babies, 2 cribs, 2 of everything she was already struggling to imagine handling alone. "Are you sure?" she managed to ask, picking up the phone with shaking hands. "Absolutely. 2 healthy heartbeats, 2 separate sacs, identical twins from the looks of it. Congratulations." After Janet hung up, Alyssa sat in stunned silence. "Twins," the word echoed in her head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. "What did they say?" Nora asked gently. "Twins. I'm having twins." Nora's eyes widened. "Oh my God, Liz. That's..." She paused, clearly trying to decide if congratulations were appropriate given the circumstances. "How do you feel?" How did she feel? Terrified, overwhelmed, alone in a way that felt like drowning. "I don't know how I'm going to do this," she whispered. 1 baby felt impossible without him. 2 babies. She couldn't finish the sentence. The reality of it was too enormous, too frightening to put into words. "You won't be doing it alone," Nora said firmly. "David and I will help. Mom will come visit. You have people who love you." But even as her sister spoke the words, Alyssa knew they weren't enough. Love wasn't the same as partnership. Support wasn't the same as having someone who was equally invested in these children's futures. She thought about Elias, probably in his office right now, making deals and building his empire, completely unaware that his world had just doubled in size. Part of her wanted to call him, to share this moment the way couples were supposed to share these moments, but a larger part of her couldn't bear the thought of his reaction, the careful calculation, the immediate pivot to logistics and planning, the way he would somehow make even this miraculous news feel like a problem to be solved rather than a blessing to be celebrated. Instead, she pressed her hands to her belly where 2 tiny hearts were beating in perfect synchronization, and whispered, "It's okay, babies. I'll figure this out. I'll figure out how to love you enough for both parents." Outside, the November rain continued to fall, washing the world clean and gray, while inside, Alyssa began the slow process of reimagining her life as a single mother of twins. The cramping started at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in December. Alyssa woke to a sharp twisting pain low in her abdomen that made her gasp and clutch the thin blanket of Nora's pull-out couch. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Maybe she'd slept in a weird position. Maybe the babies were just getting more active at 20 weeks. But then it happened again, stronger this time, accompanied by a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness and everything to do with the kind of fear that lived in every pregnant woman's nightmares. "Nora," she whispered into the darkness. No response. Her sister and David were heavy sleepers, exhausted from chasing Camden all day and working full-time jobs that barely covered their rent. Another cramp, this one strong enough to make her bite down on her lip to keep from crying out. She fumbled for her phone on the coffee table. The screen's blue glow, harsh in the pre-dawn darkness. Google wasn't reassuring. Sharp abdominal pain at 20 weeks could mean anything from round ligament stretching to preterm labor to something called placental abruption that sounded terrifying. Even without knowing the details, she tried to convince herself it was nothing. She'd been stressed, not eating well, sleeping on a couch for 2 months. Her body was probably just protesting the less than ideal conditions. But when she stood up to use the bathroom, the pain doubled her over, and when she looked down, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. Blood, not a lot, but enough to send every maternal instinct she'd developed into full panic mode. "Nora." This time, she didn't whisper. Her sister appeared in the doorway within seconds, hair wild from sleep, instantly alert in the way that only mothers could be when they heard fear in someone's voice. "What's wrong?" "Something's wrong with the babies. I'm bleeding." Nora didn't waste time with questions or reassurances. She was already grabbing her car keys, shouting for David to stay with Camden, throwing a coat over Alyssa's shoulders, and helping her to the car. The drive to Queens General took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Alyssa sat in the passenger seat with her hands pressed protectively over her belly, trying to feel for movement, for any sign that her twins were okay. Nora said. But her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and she was driving with the focused intensity of someone who was trying not to panic. What if they're not? What if I did something wrong? What if it's because I've been so stressed and not eating enough? And Stoffless isn't your fault, but it felt like her fault. It felt like cosmic punishment for being angry at Elias, for not being grateful enough for the miracle growing inside her, for not being strong enough to handle this pregnancy alone. The emergency room was exactly what she'd expected. Fluorescent lights, uncomfortable plastic chairs, and the particular smell of antiseptic that seemed to exist only in hospitals. The triage nurse was kind but efficient, asking questions that Alyssa answered through gritted teeth as another wave of pain hit. "Any chance the father could meet you here?" the nurse asked as she took Alyssa's blood pressure. "No," Alyssa said automatically. Nora shot her a look. "Liz, he doesn't know about the twins yet." The nurse's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't comment. In the ER, she'd probably seen every possible family configuration in crisis. A pregnant woman without her partner was hardly unusual. They wheeled her into an exam room where a young doctor, who looked like she was maybe 12 years old, introduced herself as Dr. Kim and began the familiar routine of ultrasound gel and searching for heartbeats. The silence stretched too long. "Is everything okay?" Alyssa asked, her voice small in the sterile room. "I'm just getting a good look at everything," Dr. Kim said in the carefully neutral tone that medical professionals used when they didn't want to worry patients, but couldn't offer reassurance yet. More silence. The ultrasound wand moved across Alyssa's belly while she stared at the ceiling tiles, and tried not to think about all the worst-case scenarios her mind kept offering. "There we go," Dr. Kim said finally, and Alyssa heard it. The rapid, strong sound of 2 hearts beating in perfect rhythm. "Both babies look good. Heart rates are normal. Movement is normal." Alyssa started crying before she realized she was going to. Relief flooded through her so completely that she felt elated. "Then what's causing the bleeding?" "It looks like a small placental separation. Not uncommon with twins, especially when the mother is under stress. The good news is, it's minor and appears to have stopped. But I'm going to admit you overnight for observation, and you'll need to stay on modified bed rest for the next few weeks." "What does that mean?" "It means no lifting, no extended standing, no stress. You need to take care of yourself, which means letting other people take care of you." After Dr. Kim left, Nora pulled up a chair beside the hospital bed. "You have to call him." "Nora, no arguments. You're 20 weeks pregnant with twins. You just had a medical emergency, and you're going to be on bed rest. You can't do this alone anymore." "I've been doing fine alone." "Have you? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like you haven't slept in weeks. You've lost weight instead of gaining it, and you just ended up in the emergency room. Nora's voice was gentle but firm. I love you, and David loves you, but we can't give you what you need. We can't afford to take time off work to be with you all day. We can't pay for the kind of care you're going to need. Alyssa knew her sister was right, but the thought of calling Elias felt impossible. How do you tell someone you've cut out of your life that you need them? How do you explain that you've been carrying his children, plural, for 5 months without telling him? What if he doesn't want them? She whispered. Then you'll know for sure, and you can stop hoping he'll change. But what if he does want them? What if he's been waiting for you to give him another chance? Alyssa stared at the hospital bracelet around her wrist. Thornhill, Alyssa, 20 weeks gestation, twins. Her phone was in her purse. Elias's number still saved under my heart from back when she'd believed that's what he was. She could call him right now, tell him everything, and either rebuild their family or confirm that it was truly over. But lying in that hospital bed, feeling the gentle flutter of movement from the two lives depending on her to make the right choices, she realized that her fear of his rejection was nothing compared to her fear of something happening to these babies, while she was trying to prove she could handle everything alone. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, what? I'll call him, but not tonight. Tomorrow, when I'm thinking clearly and can figure out what to say. Nora squeezed her hand. What you say is the truth, that he's going to be a father, and that these babies deserve to know if he wants to be their dad. Outside the hospital window, Queens stretched out in all directions under the December night sky. Somewhere in Manhattan, Elias was probably asleep in their king-sized bed, unaware that in a few hours his entire world was about to change again. Alyssa stared at her phone for 23 minutes before she found the courage to dial. It was 2:15 p.m. on Wednesday, and she was back at Nora's apartment, propped up on the couch with pillows behind her back and strict instructions not to move unless absolutely necessary. The modified bed rest felt like house arrest, leaving her with nothing but time to think about the conversation she'd been avoiding for 2 months. Elias's contact was still saved as my heart in her phone, a reminder of who they used to be when pet names felt natural instead of like artifacts from an archaeological dig of their relationship. She pressed call before she could change her mind again. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, she almost hung up. Alyssa. His voice hit her like a physical force. She'd forgotten how he said her name, soft with a slight emphasis on the middle syllable that made it sound like something precious instead of just a collection of sounds. Hi. Are you okay? Is everything? She could hear him moving, probably closing his office door, shutting out whatever meeting or call she'd interrupted. I've been worried sick. Nora wouldn't tell me anything except that you were okay, but you look so you've seen me. A pause. I may have driven by the apartment a few times just to, I don't know, make sure you were eating, make sure you were okay. The image of Elias sitting in his Tesla outside Nora's building, watching for glimpses of her through the windows, did something complicated to her chest. I'm okay, she said, which was both true and completely false. You don't sound okay, Elias. I need to tell you something. Another pause, longer this time. She could picture him settling into his chair, preparing for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. In the background, she could hear the familiar sounds of his office, the soft hum of climate control, the distant murmur of the city far below. I'm listening. I had to go to the emergency room last night. But the word exploded out of him, followed by the sound of his chair scraping across the floor. Are you hurt? What happened? Which hospital? I'm coming. I'm fine. The baby is fine. But she took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. There's something I should have told you. What do you mean the baby is fine? Alyssa, what aren't you telling me? This was it. The moment that would either bring them together or confirm that they were truly broken beyond repair. We're having twins. Silence. Not the thoughtful quiet of someone processing good news, but the complete absence of sound that comes when someone's entire understanding of reality has just shifted. Twins, he repeated finally, his voice strange and flat. Identical twins. I found out at my 16-week appointment, and I know I should have called you then. But I was angry and hurt, and you've known for 4 weeks that we're having twins and you didn't tell me. The accusation in his voice made her defensive. You didn't seem particularly interested in being involved in this pregnancy. That's not fair, isn't it? Because the last time we talked, you were more concerned about a business meeting than the fact that your wife was carrying your child. So, you punished me by keeping my children away from me. I wasn't punishing you. I was protecting myself from what? From you turning this into another project to be managed. From you calculating the financial impact of twins instead of being excited about them. from you finding another reason why the timing was inconvenient. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, sharp, controlled breaths like he was trying to maintain his composure. Where are you? He asked finally. At Nora's. I'm coming over, Elias. No, I can't. I'm not ready to see you yet. Too bad. You just told me I'm having twins and my wife, my pregnant wife, was in the emergency room last night without me. I'm coming over, whether you're ready or not. Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. Not anger exactly, but determination. The voice he used when he'd made up his mind about something and wouldn't be swayed. I'm on bed rest, she said quickly. Doctor's orders. I can't have stress right now. Then don't fight me on this. Let me come see you. Let me. His voice cracked slightly. Let me see that you're okay. Alyssa closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Part of her wanted to see him, wanted to share the wonder and terror of carrying twins with the only other person in the world who would love these babies as much as she did. But a larger part of her was terrified of the disappointment. What if he looked at her growing belly and saw only complications? What if he asked about logistics instead of whether she'd felt them kicking yet? What if this conversation ended with him walking away from all three of them for good? If you come over, you have to promise me something, she said finally. Anything. Don't bring your phone. Don't check your messages. Don't act like this is a meeting you need to get through so you can get back to your real life. This is my real life, Alyssa. You and these babies. You are my real life. The words were everything she'd wanted to hear for months. But she'd learned not to trust promises made in moments of crisis. Prove it, she said quietly. I will. I'm leaving the office right now. I'll be there in 30 minutes. After he hung up, Alyssa sat in the sudden silence of Nora's apartment, her heart racing like she'd just run a marathon. Outside, December afternoon, light filtered through the thin curtains, and somewhere in Manhattan, Elias was probably already in his car, driving toward a conversation that would determine the future of their family. She pressed her hands to her belly, where their twins were moving in slow, lazy circles. Your daddy is coming, she whispered to them. I hope he's ready to meet you. But as she lay there waiting, one question kept echoing in her mind. Was she ready to let him back into their lives? And more importantly, was she ready to risk her heart one more time on the man who had already broken it twice? In 30 minutes, she would have her answer. 28 minutes later, there was a soft knock on Nora's apartment door. Alyssa's heart jumped into her throat. She'd been lying on the couch staring at the ceiling and trying to prepare for every possible version of this conversation. But now that the moment was here, she felt completely unprepared. I'll get it, Nora said, emerging from the kitchen where she'd been pretending to organize spice jars while obviously listening for Elias's arrival. Alyssa heard the door open, heard her sister's voice, polite but cool. Then footsteps. And suddenly Elias was standing in the doorway of the living room, and all the words she'd rehearsed disappeared from her mind. He looked terrible. Not terrible in the way that made her feel vindicated, but terrible in the way that made her chest ache with recognition. His hair was messier than she'd ever seen it. His usually perfect shirt wrinkled like he'd been running his hands through the fabric. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he'd lost weight, enough that his expensive clothes hung differently on his frame. But it was his expression that undid her. Raw, vulnerable, terrified, like a man looking at something he was afraid he'd lost forever. Hi, he said quietly. Hi. He stood there for a moment, seeming unsure whether he was allowed to come closer. His eyes moved over her face, her body, cataloging changes, the weight she'd lost, the way pregnancy had softened some angles and sharpened others, the careful way she was positioned on the couch. You look beautiful, he said finally. I look like I haven't slept in 2 months. You look like you're carrying my children. The simple honesty of it broke something open inside her chest. No calculation, no analysis of logistics, just wonder. Can I? He gestured toward the couch. Can I sit with you? She nodded, scooting over to make room. When he settled beside her, careful not to jostle her, his body heat familiar and comforting. She caught his scent, the same cologne he'd worn since their first date, mixed with something that was purely him. I brought something, he said, pulling a small white bag from his jacket pocket. Prenatal vitamins, the good ones from that fancy pharmacy on the Upper East Side, and ginger tea for nausea. And he paused, looking almost embarrassed. Organic crackers. Nora mentioned you weren't eating much. Alyssa felt tears prick her eyes. Such small gestures, but they meant he'd been thinking about her specific needs. not just showing up because duty demanded it. Thank you. I also brought this. He pulled out his phone and without ceremony powered it off completely. No interruptions, just us. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid settling between them like a physical presence. Twins, he said finally, his voice filled with something that might have been awe. Are you upset? Upset? He looked at her, like she'd asked if he was upset about winning the lottery. Alyssa, I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. I'm completely unprepared. Buff upset. He shook his head. I'm the luckiest man alive. Even though the timing is terrible. Even though it's going to complicate your 5-year plan. Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. Do you know what I did after you left the first time? Worked more, probably. I sat in our bedroom for 3 hours staring at your side of the closet. All your clothes were gone, but you'd left this one sweater. That gray cashmere one you wore when you were writing. The one that was too big and had holes in the sleeves. Alyssa remembered the sweater. She'd left it because it reminded her too much of lazy Sunday mornings when they'd been happy. I held that sweater, he continued, and I realized that I'd been so focused on building a perfect life that I'd forgotten to actually live it. I'd turned into my father, not because I left, but because I was never really present, even when I was there. Elias, let me finish. He turned toward her, and she saw tears in his eyes. I spent 3 years being married to the most incredible woman in the world, and I treated our relationship like another acquisition to be managed. I scheduled our intimacy, our conversations, our future. I turned love into a business plan. You were trying to provide for us. I was trying to control everything because I was scared that if I let myself feel too much, want too much, I'd lose it all anyway. He reached out, hesitating, then gently placed his hand over hers. But I lost it anyway, didn't I? By trying so hard not to be vulnerable, I became exactly the kind of man I swore I'd never be. Alyssa felt something shifting inside her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. The acknowledgement that he was finally seeing what she'd been trying to tell him for months. What changed? She asked quietly. You left, and suddenly, all my carefully constructed plans meant nothing, because the only thing that mattered was gone. He paused, his thumb tracing small circles on her hand. I've been going to therapy. She blinked in surprise. You have, twice a week since October. Dr. Rebecca Winters. You'd like her. She doesn't let me get away with anything. He smiled woefully. She says, I have something called anxious attachment with avoidant tendencies, which is a fancy way of saying I'm terrified of being abandoned, so I abandon people first. That sounds about right. She also says that real love requires showing up imperfectly instead of waiting until you think you can do it perfectly. Alyssa felt movement in her belly. One of the twins, maybe responding to the sound of their father's voice. Without thinking, she pressed Elias's hand more firmly against her bump. Did you feel that? She whispered. His eyes went wide. Was that baby A or maybe baby B? I can't tell them apart yet. Elias went very still. His entire focus narrowed to the place where his palm rested against her growing belly. They waited, barely breathing, and then it happened again. A small but distinct movement that made him gasp. Oh my God, he breathed. That's our baby. One of them. He looked up at her, and his face was transformed. Younger, softer, filled with the kind of wonder she hadn't seen since their wedding day. Can I? He gestured toward her belly. She nodded, and he shifted closer, placing both hands gently on her bump and speaking directly to their children. Hi, babies, he said softly. I'm your dad. I know I haven't been around much, and I know your mom has been taking care of you all by herself, but I'm here now and I'm never going anywhere again. As if in response, both babies moved at once, a flutter of activity that made Alyssa laugh despite the tears streaming down her face. I think they believe you, she said. Elias looked up at her, his own eyes wet. Do you? It was the question everything had been building toward. The moment that would determine whether they were rebuilding or just saying goodbye properly. I want to, she said honestly. But I need more than promises, Elias. I need you to show me every day that we're your priority. Not just when it's convenient, not just when there's a crisis, but always. I will. I swear to you, I will. And I need you to be excited about this, not just accepting, not just resigned to it, but genuinely happy that we're having these babies. Alyssa, look at me. She met his eyes, and what she saw there took her breath away. Pure joy, untainted by fear or calculation or concern about timing. I have never been more excited about anything in my entire life. He said, twins. Our twins. I get to be their father and you get to be their mother, and we get to figure out how to love them together. Together, if you'll let me. If you'll come home and let me prove that I can be the husband and father you deserve." Alyssa felt the last of her walls crumbling, not because he'd said the right words, but because she could see in his face that he finally understood what love actually required. "Okay," she whispered. Okay, let's go home. Let's figure out how to do this together." When he kissed her, it tasted like promises and new beginnings, and the kind of love that was strong enough to be rebuilt from its own ashes. 2 years later, the sound of tiny feet running across hardwood floors had become the soundtrack of their lives. Alyssa stood in the doorway of the nursery, now transformed into a toddler wonderland of scattered toys and picture books, watching Elias attempt to wrangle two energetic 18-month-olds into their pajamas. Oliver had inherited his father's stubborn streak and was currently staging a protest against sleep by hiding under the rocking chair, while Isla sat angelically in Elias's lap, content to let her brother be the rebel. "Come on, buddy," Elias was saying, crouched down to Oliver's eye level. "Pajamas first, then we can read about the dragon." "No pajamas," Oliver declared with the fierce conviction that only toddlers could muster. "No sleep. How about we make a deal? Pajamas story, then 5 more minutes of playing with trucks." Alyssa smiled, watching her husband negotiate with a tiny human who had somehow inherited both his business acumen and his wife's stubborn independence. The Elias of 2 years ago would have solved this with efficiency. Lights out, bedtime, no negotiations. But this version of her husband had learned that love wasn't about control. It was about showing up again and again for all the messy, unpredictable moments that couldn't be scheduled or managed. Mama Isla spotted her in the doorway and immediately launched herself from Elias's arms toward Alyssa with the fearless trust that only children possessed. "Hi, baby girl." Alyssa caught her daughter breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and graham crackers. At 33, she'd discovered that her heart was capable of expanding in ways she'd never imagined, big enough to hold the fierce, protective love she felt for these two tiny humans who called her mama. "Over's being difficult," Elias said, but his voice held nothing but affection. He'd learned to find joy in their children's personalities instead of trying to mold them into more convenient versions of themselves. "All's being, too," Alyssa corrected. "Remember what Dr. Winter said. Toddler defiance is actually a sign of healthy development." Easy for her to say. She doesn't have to get him into dinosaur pajamas. Eventually, they managed to corral both children into bed, complete with stories, songs, and the elaborate ritual of checking for monsters under the bed, Oliver's request, and ensuring that all the stuffed animals were properly arranged for optimal sleeping, Ice's requirement. Later, after the dishes were done and the living room toys had been quarreled into their designated baskets, Alyssa and Elias sat on their couch, a different couch, in a different apartment. They'd sold the Manhattan penthouse 6 months after the twins were born, trading marble countertops and city views for a brownstone in Brooklyn, with a backyard where their children could learn to climb trees and plant gardens. "Good day," Elias asked, settling beside her with 2 cups of chamomile tea. "The best kind," she said, curling into his side. Exhausting, chaotic, and perfect. This had become their evening ritual. 10 minutes of quiet before they both inevitably fell asleep on the couch, too tired to make it upstairs to their bedroom. Parenthood had taught them that romance looked different than it used to. Less candlelit dinners, more shared 3 a.m. diaper changes, less spontaneous weekend getaways, more Saturday morning pancake breakfast interrupted by syrup-sticky hugs and requests for more butter. "Please, I got a call from Henderson today," Elias said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Oh, they want to expand the affordable housing project. 3 more developments, all using the sustainable model we pioneered. That's incredible. How do you feel about it?" Elias was quiet for a moment and she could feel him thinking. 2 years ago, I would have said yes immediately. The biggest deal of my career, chance to make real impact, all of that. And now I'm thinking about how much travel it would require, how many late nights, how many weekends away from home. He turned to look at her. "Is it terrible that I don't want to miss Oliver's first soccer game or Isla's first day of preschool for any amount of money?" Alyssa felt her heart do that fluttering thing it still did when he said exactly the right thing without realizing how significant it was. "It's not terrible," she said softly. "It's growth. I told them I'd consider it if they could guarantee the work could be done primarily remote, with minimal travel. If not, He shrugged. There will be other deals. There won't be other chances to watch our children discover the world. This was the man she'd always believed he could become. The one who measured success not just in dollars and square footage, but in bedtime stories, red and skinned, knees kissed, and Saturday morning dance parties in the kitchen, while pancakes cooked on the stove. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For what? For choosing us? Every day, in big ways and small ways, you choose us." Through the baby monitor on the coffee table, they could hear Oliver talking to himself in his crib, a rambling story about trucks and dinosaurs and something that sounded like, "Daddy, fix it." Isa was already asleep, her breathing soft and even through the speaker. "Do you ever regret it?" Elias asked quietly. "This life, I mean, it's so different from what we planned." Alyssa thought about their old life, the penthouse apartment, the expensive restaurants, the carefully curated existence that had looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow at its core. "I regret that it took us so long to get here," she said. "But this chaos, this beautiful mess we've built together, this is the life I always wanted. I just didn't know how to ask for it." Outside, Brooklyn was settling into its nighttime rhythm. Soon, they would drag themselves upstairs, check on their sleeping children one more time, and collapse into bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of the exhausting, exhilarating work of raising tiny humans who thought they hung the moon. It wasn't the life they'd planned, but it was better than anything they could have imagined. As Alyssa drifted off to sleep against Elias's shoulder, she thought about all the women who might be listening to their story. Women who felt unseen in their relationships, who wondered if love was supposed to be so hard, who were afraid to ask for more than what they'd been given. "Sometimes," she murmured against Elias's chest, "the most beautiful interruptions are the ones that save us from the lives we thought we wanted." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Best interruption of my life," he agreed, and in the soft glow of the baby monitor's light, surrounded by the gentle chaos of the family they'd built together, Alyssa knew with absolute certainty that some stories don't end, they just begin again. Better and braver than before. What would you risk to build the love story you truly deserve? Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't staying, it's knowing when to walk away and being brave enough to let someone prove they can change. Your participation in our channel means everything to us. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.